Here we go. Back to where we were, and what I was more or less going to say last time when we got into this very interesting and important big discussion. And I got to go back to it a little bit, partly because I just want to draw some general moral from this, which may not mean much to you yet, but it should begin to mean something. When you find two different meanings of intentionality and of representation and of constitution, and you can't tell who's speaking, and things are looking pretty bad for ever understanding the book, keep your eye on the phenomenon. That's what you should be doing, looking for those places, which is what I'm going to talk about today, where he actually describes something, and from his point of view, and the Gestalt point of view, tells draws all kinds of philosophical conclusions. And then you'll understand why he has his own notion of intentionality and representation and constitution. And I don't remember were there any others in the air at that point. I can't think of any. But so that's the general moral. Now, one thing that wasn't clear last time, which I wouldn't have gone back to, but it came up in an email that somebody sent me, and it happens to come up in just in a word at the very end of our reading. And with that as an excuse, and why he would say something like that, this whole issue about temporality at the end is very relevant to the weird discussion, which may have seemed weird to you, it seemed perfectly okay to me, about conditions of satisfaction for the two different kinds of intentionality that are involved in Merleau-Ponty and in analytic philosophers like Searle. And remember, I said, and I still think it's true, that the final test of intentionality has to be whether there are, and I said conditions of satisfaction. That might be the wrong way to say it, because that way of talking is sort of owned by the Searle side of this, which isn't wrong. I mean, beliefs have conditions of satisfaction. That is, if you believe something, then the world is like that, then your belief is true, and you're satisfied. And if the world isn't like that, then your belief turns out not to be true, and it doesn't meet conditions of satisfaction. But the way something is seen and has intentionality is it's got to imply something which could turn out to be false. It can't, I mean, that's how you can tell that it's about something, that it has some kind of, don't want to say meaning, because again, I think that belongs to the traditional intentionality. So let's say it has some kind of sense or some kind of significance. What is it to have some kind of sense or significance? Well, it's to somehow imply something which could turn out not to be that way. And that's why I brought in Gerbich's talk about perceptual implications and how the front of the house implies the back, looks like there's a back, and in that sense is, in a weird way of putting it, maybe about the back, or implies is better, implies the back. And now comes the part that gave people a hard time, I could see in his office hours and in email. That must mean that when the front looks like it's hiding the back, covering up the back, if there is a back present already, then it turns out that there's no back, there's a puzzle. How can that be? It doesn't bother people that when they believe some proposition, like it's a beautiful sunny day, or let's say they believe that it's a terrible rainy day, it can turn out to be false. But why does it? I don't quite know. Well, I sort of see why it bothers you to think that you want to think. Well, either there's a front of the house and it looks the way it does because it hides the back of the house, and then how could it turn out to be false when you go around and look and discover it's a facade? Or there's a front of a house and it remains open whether there's really a back. And then we get all that weird talk about neutrality and ambiguity, which we were in just at the end last time. That's not going to work either. It isn't as if the front of the house looks like maybe there's a back and maybe there's not a back. It looks like there's a back. Of course, it's indeterminate and ambiguous in the way everything in perception is never finished. But there's something special about the way the front of the house perceptually implies the back, and there may or there may not be a back. Now, the first thing to say is when you're involved in coping with it and not standing back and thinking about it, it actually looks like there's a back there. I mean, once you step back and start to think about it and reflect on it, and he's talking about that too here toward the end. How if you reflect, he says at the bottom of 276, I don't want to read it right now, you think there's some kind of data there that needs to be interpreted. That would be like the sense datum of the front of the house. You can interpret it as the sense datum of the front of a house or a sense datum of a facade. But that's not the way it looks if you're involved. That's the way it looks if you're detached and say, well, maybe there's really a back, and maybe there isn't, and I'm not going to take any stand on it, and then there's going to be some neutral something there, but not a normal perception. Okay, but I'm leading up to the problem. You are involved, it looks like there's a back, and then you go around and there isn't. How are you supposed to understand that? Well, that's where this temporality discussion comes in at the end. That is what he says, in effect, that whenever you perceive anything, you're already committed to a future way it's going to develop. It has inexhaustible richness or thickness. Those are his two favorite terms for it. That means it already looks, let's say, like a house with a back. And when you find out it isn't, then your whole temporal stream of experience gets disrupted. That's what we were talking about before. And I said in a hurry that your expectations explode, but I didn't explain what that meant. That means that if you were set to see the back of the house, and to make it dramatic, you go around from the front, and instead of it being a facade, or instead of it being the back of a house, there's a big swimming pool there, or a waterfall, something crazy. Well, then all your bodily expectations, the sort of perceptual grip you had on what was going on, is undermined, and for a minute you just don't know what's going on. That's when it explodes, and then you get some new understanding of it, and you see that it's always been a kind of facade in front of a swimming pool. And then we said, and this is important, you can't go back anymore and remember even how it was. That's the sort of weird way that temporality can be retroactive in this perceptual level. I mean, it restructures your memory of the experience if it's radical enough. You can't anymore picture. Remember, we did it that last time. We were saying with the back of the man or the woman. It's not that you see a back which you interpret as a man or a woman. That wouldn't explode. That would just turn out to be wrong. That would be turning it into this other kind of conditions of satisfaction. Well, there's a back, and I interpret it to be the back of a man, and therefore I expect it to be the back of a man. This is all perfectly normal, non-Merleau-Ponty intentionality. So I have the belief that if I went around I would see a face of a man, and I have the expectation, all that has propositional content, and all that could be falsified. But if there was a neutral something that you experienced, then there wouldn't be any explosion, so to speak. No big deal change in your perception. You just change your belief. Instead of seeing this back as having, if you went around it, the possibility of seeing a woman from the front, that interpretation would turn out to be right. The other interpretation, a man. Anyway, one of the interpretations that would turn out to be wrong that you thought was right, and vice versa. And the back would go on looking the same. There wouldn't be this kind of explosion. Every synthesis is both exploded and rebuilt by time with one and the same process. That's what I'm trying to explain. So with some time, either your house or your girl thing or man thing experience can be exploded as time passes. And what is it to say rebuilt with time? Well, it's to say you find, you now that's what I meant. You retroactively remember it differently, and you are set to deal with it differently, and it looks different. Now, the next thing that puzzled people was that I have to say something about. Oh, I forgot it just a second. Yeah, just a second, but it's the next point. Oh, yeah, sure. That somehow it bothered people to think, well, then what really is there is, say, a man in the Telegraph Avenue, or what really is there is a facade. And how do we know that? And is that about the sort of objective world? And from where are we describing the objective world about what's really there? Well, that is a complete mix-up, and I therefore had to come in and talk about it. Of course, but I can see why somebody thinks that. That's, in a way, don't panic, that crypto mechanism. Whatever you think is the way, whatever you're experiencing it as right now looks like the way it really is, and it looks like it's because of a man that is causing you to have this experience of a man, and that's that. But you've got to stay on the level of perception here. So when it turns out that you go around and it's a man, that's just another experience, not the objective final fact. So it could turn out that it wasn't a man after all. It's a girl wearing a beard and a mustache to fool people, or because she has the job of acting like that important pharaoh in Egypt that had a beard because pharaohs were all men, and so she wore a beard. There's always endless possibilities of new explosions and new taking it back. There isn't a right answer which undermines and settles it. I must have caused that, or the crypto mechanism caused that. You've got to think, well, yes, the experience, you drop behind from what looked like a girl and it looks like a man, and the next time you go around, you may have to that may explode and you may have to retroactively fix that. And it's all temporal, and you never come to the end of it. And everything is retroactively changeable. I mean, if it gets bad enough, you go crazy. I mean, you do. But up to a certain point, lots of surprises as to what you were taken for granted in your perception turn out not to be so. That's it. That's what I wanted to say. That's all meant to clarify very sensible confusions that I could see followed from my trying to cover that too fast. Any comments? Because that's important to understand that. I can tell you another version of it in a minute, but which I just don't remember. But let's hear.
Well, I mean, what I don't understand is this: if you don't remember how it was once you experience it in a new way, then how can how can conditions of satisfaction ever, go back to, how it was and kind of match up,
Well, I think partly your question is based on a false premise. If you can't remember how it was, that's ambiguous. You can certainly remember that you thought this was the back of a girl and you were very eager to go around and see what kind of a nice girl this might be. You can remember all that. What you can't remember when you drop behind again is how in the world you ever got fooled by this back as if it were the back of a beautiful girl, because it looks perfectly evidently like the back of a man. You can't picture that, but you remember that you were fooled. Does that help? I mean, it seemed that you were getting off on a bad track.
Okay, so then what precisely is the conditions of satisfaction or the conditions of improvement?
Okay.
Whatever.
Okay. I guess the conditions would be nice to have a nice word for this. The conditions of we'll try to figure it out. I mean, what we want to know is, what do you call that which can satisfy your expectations, or your anticipations would be better. The reason I make that distinction is expectations is propositional. I expect that it's going to look like a girl. That's already in the detached, reflective, traditional intentionality mode. Anticipation is and there won't be any explosion, remember. Your expectation was wrong. You've got a new expectation. But if it was an anticipation, which is if your whole body was set to focus on and see a woman and you see a man, then your expectations are, your anticipations are upset. You could say I anticipated, that it was. You could just use the word anticipated as if it meant expected, but you need a distinction. One of them is an intellectual thing, a propositional idea, something mental that you believe or expected, and the other one is supposed to be an embodied thing, an embodied way of being, some way you were set to see, already ready, and that was being motivated is the funny word from Merleau Ponty, by what you're seeing already, so that what you're seeing already is leading you to anticipate that. Keep asking yourself, what would it have to be for it to be able to retroactively explode? It has to be more than an interpretation, more than a belief, more than an expectation, or maybe different than. I don't know about more doesn't mean anything. Different than. It has to be some way that you're already coping with the future now, so that when the future turns out to be not the way you were already coping with it, there's real breakdown. And now we're trying to find a word for that. Conditions of improvement is wrong. That has I use that term in a different context where it makes sense. It doesn't help here. Conditions of satisfaction. Your perceptual implications are not what? Satisfied? Fulfilled?
You could use the word fulfilled.
Fulfilled is just what I came across.
Yeah, because, the regular phenomenological word for this is...
It's fulfilled, isn't it? It's funny. I came across it the minute you did. Probably telepathy. Yes. Okay. Yes, let's talk about conditions of fulfillment. It's just another word.
Yeah.
But
just intersubstitutable with satisfaction. That's just a...
It's just, well, I'm afraid it's not going to, we're not going to have any, satisfaction is a technical term. Normally, if you were a philosophy student, to tell you that your belief that it's a sunny day today is satisfied would sound very odd to you. If your belief is true, let me remind you, those of you, or tell you, the conditions of satisfaction is a technical term that's supposed to cover your desire being, what, fulfilled maybe, your belief being true, your memory being, I don't know, we need a new word for that one too.
Accurate.
What?
Accurate.
Accurate, and so forth. All of those are species, species of conditions of satisfaction. Something and your expectations, they get whatever. I think they get fulfilled, unfortunately, but you just don't have enough words to go around. Or maybe your expectations actually get satisfied. Well, your desires get satisfied. So you take some normal word and you stretch it to cover into mental states which it wasn't meant to cover. And you just need that, because what they all have is blah blah conditions. You've got to have a word in there, which means something that if it's there, it makes it correct, and if it's not there, it will correct. You see, you don't have any word for that. Desires don't get to be correct when they get to be fulfilled. They just get to be fulfilled. There's this general notion that there's something that outstanding that hasn't been found out yet or happened yet, which is going to affect the truth of, or whatever. Boy, I don't know how anybody ever talks about this. Maybe they don't. Everybody just sort of talks about conditions of satisfaction as if they knew what they were talking about. And there's nothing, the phenomenon is okay. It's just that there's no neutral words for it. You've got to make up technical terms. Now we've got a new problem. Here is this technical term, conditions of satisfaction, which covers memories, desires, beliefs, expectations. What else? I don't know.
Perception.
What?
Perception.
Perception.
Perceptual, yeah.
Well, perceptual. Yeah, oh, sure. An action. But,
Vertical perception or illusion.
That's right. We should put that in. Perceptual, and it's not wrong, perception itself has these kinds of conditions of satisfaction. If I think I see, to take a simple example, a yellow Volvo outside the window, that's going to, either there is, and it turns out that my perception is veridical, that's just a version of true, or it turns out there isn't, and my perception is an illusion, it's not satisfied. That the propositional content of my visual experience, that there's a yellow Volvo outside the window causing me to have this visual experience to talk like Searle, is not satisfied because there isn't one. Or it is satisfied when there is one, and so forth. Well, this is just all background. Now what we want is just to find a word for this when it's not. Well, I guess I'm inclined to say we just have to take over the word satisfied as a technical term and say this is another form of it. I can't think of anything else to do. But it's a different kind of satisfaction, because all these other kinds of satisfaction you can state as a proposition what it is that you seem to be seeing, what you believe, what you expect, what you desire, and this you can do that too. You can state the proposition, it's a lovely girl, but you got to keep reminding yourself that this one can explode and the other one can't. And that's what I'm trying to get at. You're committing the future in a way right now at this perceptual level that you're not at this mental level. Okay, does that help any? Eric?
Yeah, I think the exact wording is not so important. It's the anticipation that break down, and it's nothing else.
That's right. The anticipations break down. Breakdown's a good word. You don't think of beliefs breaking down. That helps. I mean, or none of these other things. Desires don't break down. What breaks down is your anticipation, your body set. You're already in the future, the way your hand is already at the doorknob. And that is what explodes and gets undermined, gets breakdown. Yeah.
I think this is exactly the right way to think about it, because it seems like what distinguishes Merleau-Ponty's view from someone like Searle's is that our body set or anticipations get disrupted or broken down.
Disrupted, that's a good one.
And the notions of correctness and satisfaction should be left to the level of judgment or thought. Or
That's
like
right,
that.
that's right. Okay, maybe the moral of all this, yeah.
It comes nearer the notion of equilibrium, doesn't it? Getting a grip and...
That
would be the state we would be in.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. It's funny, I want to say, yeah, that's very exactly right, and yet it is, but I mean, it's not wrong. It's exactly what Merleau-Ponty is saying, so it can't be wrong. But it's saying more than is involved in just the notion of set and breakdown. It's a Merleau-Pontian thesis that we're always trying to get a maximal grip and heading toward equilibrium, and when we fail, then we have this breakdown, explosion. But you could tell the explosion story without the equilibrium story in just this more minimal story. We're already taking a stand now on something that we are, and the way we're doing things now is already affected by what is there in the future for us. And when it's not there, there's a breakdown. And adding equilibrium and maximal grip is not necessary for the more minimal story. Husserl, for instance, has a breakdown explosion story at one point, but he never has the equilibrium. Okay. At one point I was going to say one more thing about this, which I intended to say somewhere, because Merleau-Ponty mentions, I'll jump to it, highlighted data on 248. And this is relevant to Husserl and highlighted data. So because I wouldn't bother to explain highlighted data. I'd just say ignore it as Husserl, but we need it. But I think I got the wrong, no, here it is, the bottom of your 248. And it's all typical Husserl. But I was drawing a conclusion. I'm trying to say too many things at once. The moral of this, I'm putting the conclusion in the middle of it now, is keep your eye on the phenomena. All that crazy struggling with the word and satisfaction. You don't get lost if you just remember the person on Telegraph Avenue or the house or something, and then all this talk of anticipations, explosions, and so forth. You can get a grip on it. So here's another one where he's talking about how I'm dealing with something, probing it with my eye at the bottom of 248, and it's beckoning, there's this vague beckoning for my body to synchronize with it. Now that is equilibrium talk and maximum grip talk. It's trying to get us to get an optimally rich, stable grip on it. It's like the masts and the trees as usual. They were vaguely beckoning. They were more like a storm that was threatening. It's all in the metaphors. There was a tension. Let's try to find something like that. A tension drawing me to resolve it. And when I do, then my body solves it. This is a color one. This a sort of spasm which stops as soon as he adopts the bodily attitude corresponding to blue. Well, these people are mentally deranged or injured, so they're sort of exaggerated forms of this. But you can find it in your own experience. Maybe not getting the right color, but my favorite experience, which you've all had in some version or other, is, and it's got to, and highlighted data refers to the matter that's there, that's unstructured, that's calling you to find the right structure to understand it. In Merleau, Ponty somewhere says, I don't think we've read it yet, you have to find the key to unlock the phenomena. That means you have to get the body set that's in sync. And he does say in this very reading, though I couldn't turn to it, that you get this, I think I can in a minute, that you have to get in sync with the object that's there. Of course, the object isn't there until you get in sync with it. And because that's what brings out the object that's there. And on the perceptual level, it's one of these circular things. But let me just give you the phenomenon, and I'll show you where he talks about it. My version of this is when you are thinking that you're going to get some milk, and you're eating, and you're talking, and you take up something, and you swallow it, and it's not milk. Let's say it's wine. Now, you go into shock. You have this sort of in your mouth. It isn't as if you suddenly realize, oh, I thought it was going to be milk, and it's wine. You don't know what it is. It isn't milk anymore, and it isn't wine yet. And then you get the right set. You get the right body relationship. What does he put it there? You get the right bodily attitude, and it tastes like wine, and then it's okay. But it's completely yucky until you get, and then it's highlighted data. It's calling, beckoning for you to get the right attitude to understand it. And I'll go to that. I wasn't going to explain it in this order, but I think I can find the place where he talks about this funny thing. And of course you want to say, and we're back to this again, well, it was wine all along, and you finally found out you should never have thought it was milk. And that's right. But it isn't wine all along from a finished objective point of view. It could turn out that after a little bit of wine, it goes back into a yucky experience, and it turns out it was really water. I mean, you don't want to stand outside in a detached attitude when you're describing these experiences. But just insofar as you get it, you think it's wine and it works for the while that it works, and it works probably for the rest of the temporality that this experience is in, it's wine. It turns out to be wine. You don't want to deny that. On 278, and this is just the way perception works. About 15 lines from the bottom. The act of looking is indivisibly prospective. We've been going through all this. This is really the phenomenon. Since the object is the final stage of my process of focusing, and retrospective, since it will present itself as perceiving its own appearance. You recognize what we just said. The wine presents itself as perceiving its own experience. It presents itself as it was wine all along, you idiot. How did you manage to think that you were going to make it taste like milk? And it's inevitable that when you get, and that's what it looked like when the man on the Telegraph Avenue, well, it was a man all along. Why in the world would you think otherwise? But until you get that, you're just in this vague, unstable state. And after you get that, you've retroactively decided, well, that was that all along. And that's how experience works. And it isn't false. It's just that you've got to realize that it's never settled. It's in this temporal stream and could be retroactively taken back. It's not from nowhere that you can declare that. That was a very important objection that I'm still answering. Okay, now I've said everything I want to say about that. I'm ready to go on to where I've been supposed to be explaining this chapter. But sooner or later, I think that's all very important to say. What's most important about Merleau-Ponty is sort of always there, typical holist thing, but hardly ever thematized. And that's this whole story we've just been saying. It comes up every once in a while in a sentence here, an explosion there, but you never get it told the way I just told it anywhere, I think. Yeah.
Well, I want to ask you about the
No, I will either answer you or go on.
I'm just confused because for Searle, it allows for the possibility there when you're directly seeing something in perception. Because you could either be hallucinating or you could either be brain.
Okay, I don't want to talk about it.
Okay.
Done talking about it. That too many details will get us back too much into it. Let's go on where we are. I got to see where I am. Okay, now I'm just going to do for the rest of the time, unless somebody interrupts me again, which is fine. But I want to lay out for, say, 20 minutes or so what the chapter's about. So, because today we're finishing it, and I therefore want to be sure we've finished it. So we're now in the second part of the book, part 2 of the book, The World is Perceived. Maybe after office hours I should make a quick parenthetical. How many of you, I can't resist, this is so weird. How many of you read the sexuality chapters and the language chapter? The sexuality chapter, that's more likely that you think that might be interesting. I thought it might be interesting. And maybe it wasn't, or was it, I don't know. How many read the language chapter? Okay, I'm wondering whether it's a new technique for teaching to tell people not to read chapters, and out of just suggestiveness they will do the assignment. But I guess not quite. Anyway, I owe you a quick explanation. I'm not going to tell you why I found them uninteresting, because it may be my fault. But one thing is sure, that this is all I want to say, is in the order of the book, there's no reason for them to be where they are. They're just an interruption in the story about 2 things that the book is about, perception and the body. I mean, it isn't just about the body. Sexuality might come in there. I don't know what, and it might be about the body where, after all, you have to have a body in order to say things and make the noises that language is. But that would be sort of a sidetrack. I mean, it's really about the perception of objects and how that is related to having a body. That is, what it is to have a body and what it is to perceive an object. And so, for no reason that I can see, except he threw the pages up in the air and they came down this way, that all of a sudden, in the middle of the synthesis of the body, comes the sexuality chapter, comes the speech chapter. I'm ready to read them if I had time, and if enough people insisted I would, to see if there's anything interesting in them. But I'm not going to teach them, because the theory of the body and perception comes back on your page 235, and you'd never notice if you didn't what those other chapters if they hadn't been there. And I'm just going to ignore them because they don't belong in that part of the argument, as far as I can see. Now, so we're on to the world is perceived, which is a fine thing. But they're really a threefold thing: self, object, and world. And he always wants to say that whenever you're talking about any one of those, you're talking about everything. That's the holism story. There's always a field. There's always me being pulled in by the field. There's always the object, which is pulling me to get a grip on it. And so here we are, back to the object. And we're going to talk about this correlative unity of the object and the lived body on 239. Now I'm going to summarize what I think is important in the short little introduction to Book 2, whereas the body is the theory of the body is a theory of perception. I find that a very strange title. It does say that in French, I suppose. It isn't the kind of thing you could miss. I don't see that he has a theory of the body, and I don't think he believes there can be a theory of perception. I guess theory must mean something different in French than it does to me in English. If you change that to the account of the body is already an account of perception, I'd feel all right about it. Theory is something scientists have. He doesn't have a theory of the body. He doesn't want a theory of the body. Is that in French? Theory is much more general? It's like that. Okay. So, but you can think, I would change it in my head to the account of the body as the account of perception, because it's very confusing if you're looking for a theory of the body and a theory of perception in the way that he doesn't just not have one. He thinks you can't have one. Where by theory I mean an objective, detached, rule-like or law-like description of some phenomenon. That's exactly what the body schema, remember I said this last time, is just for the name for the fact that we've got no theory at all about how the body does this. It just does it. It does this, meaning unify our experience. To have, yeah.
So, sorry, but he
No, go ahead.
He does say that there is the theory of the body schema, and I mean maybe it's just the way he's using the word theme.
Well, I think that he shouldn't. I mean, that's the point.
Well, the point it's not objective thought, kind of.
Right, but what could be, how could there be a theory of the body schema when in a certain sense there's nothing you can say about the body schema except sort of that it's what does, and then you describe the object.
And so I think what you said was right, in that it's not theory in the sense of the traditional objective science, objective thought kind of scientific causal theory. But he's just going to use the word theory.
Yeah.
Better or worse.
Well, that's right. And I want to just say for worse, we're not disagreeing. Clear your mind of it. There's no theory here. And that's fine. A phenomenologist gives you an account or a description and has plenty to say without getting into the detached attitude of reflection and without telling you any sort of objective truths. Yeah.
Discuss this and say that when we say the theory of the body or the perception, we mean that the problem with the theoretical approach to the body is that it misses the fact that there could be only one theory dealing with the object as perceived in the body is the same.
I see. I like that.
And this you could miss if you have the objective approach, precisely, in which, the theoretical objective approach, in which you miss the intimate connection between the two.
Okay, maybe. I mean, he's just saying maybe that he's denying that there could be a theory of the body. Because when you try to describe it, you've already got a theory of perception. Now, if only he gave up the talk of a theory of perception too, because I don't think he's got that either, then I think he'd be fine. And people say Gestalt theory, don't they? Or do they? So, I mean, I guess if you have an account which is, I don't know, explicit and intersubjectively shareable or something, you could claim you've already got a theory, particularly if you're in psychology and want to be scientific. So the Gestalt people say they've got a theory, though they've got no,
It would
they
be
got
the
something.
principles by which you organize the data of the description.
That's right, it's sort of an organized description. If theory means organized description, then he's got a theory of perception. And maybe, Olivier thinks, maybe the chapter title means that you couldn't have an organized account of the body except insofar as you saw it as correlative with an organized account of perception. That's the best light we could put on it. What does Gibson call what he's got? Theory?
Ecological approach. So he's actually very careful.
Isn't that nice?
He wants to say the ecological approach.
Good. I mean, that's what...
But he's doing science, and he thinks he's doing science.
Well, that's even doubly nice. He's doing science, and yet he's not going to claim he's the fancy
I think
talk.
he's doing metaphysics, too.
But okay.
For better.
Yeah, for the better. Okay, so I'm going to read you the line about the correlative now in 239. Halfway down. Every external perception is immediately synonymous with a certain perception of my body, just as every perception of my body is made explicit in the language of external perception. That's metaphor, of course. He doesn't mean talk about it. The language of external perception is perceptual implication, like the front of the house saying, there's a bat behind me, without actually saying anything. So it's made explicit in the language of external perception. If then, as we have seen to be the case, the body is not a transparent object and is not presented to us in virtue of the law of its constitution, that would be really a theory, as the circle through the geometer, if it is an expressive unity, which we can learn to know only by actively taking it up, this structure will be passed on to the visible world. Well, that's about the correlation of it, but that also raises the first basic point I want to talk about, which I think is very deep in Merleau-Ponty and very much comes up all the time, but hard to talk about. And I don't know where, if anywhere, he talks about it head on. But you want to ask sort of why. Does unity of the body, you can only get access to it by actively taking it up. Why can't you just describe it? This is equivalent to saying you have to experience it. There is nothing there but an experience. Nothing to say about it, but to call attention to this experience. And that's tied up with what she was saying about that really has in the background the notion of equilibrium and maximum grip and the sense of attention, not paying attention, but there is a tension, T-E-N-S-I-O-N, this pull, this vague beckoning, the idea that it's something you can only live and feel that he's talking about. There isn't anything else to say about it, except it feels like you're moving toward getting it right and getting a better grip, or it feels like you're moving toward getting it wrong and things are getting blurry. And that's why it has to be actively taken up. As soon as you try to have a detached look at yourself and the object, it doesn't pull you anymore. It isn't like a storm on the horizon anymore. It isn't as if you feel that this direction is better and this direction is worse. That's all only going to happen while you're involved actually in coping with things. And then, and only then, do you get the sense of the body as this kind of what he calls expressive unity. Why expressive? Well, because every part, again, refers in this peculiar sense to all the rest. So that what's going on with any part of your body has already taken account of in the rest. Your balance is taking account of it. You can switch from doing something with one hand to doing something with another hand. You can switch from paying attention to mainly how it looks to how it sounds. All of this, what he calls later this intersensorial unity or the synergistic system, is a unity in which how any part of it is experienced is already telling you about the rest of it. It's another holism. It's the same holism story. Okay, so why do we have to live it? Well, it's because I'm just skimming my own notes here. It's always readiness to do something. If you aren't in this readiness, if you aren't geared into the world, then you don't have this experience, and you're missing the whole thing. So this is the normative pull that of getting of being towards, and you've got to keep your eyes open for it. He says sometimes equilibrium. He says sometimes maximum grip. But here on 244, for instance, I found him saying something else. But they're all the same, about 5 lines down. The motor significance of colors is comprehensible only if we cease to be closed. Only if they cease to be closed states or indescribable qualities presented to an observing and thinking subject. See, that's how you can't really understand them. And if they impinge within me upon a certain general setting through which I come to grips with the world. Well, come to terms with the world. I read it my way. Come to terms with the world. But it's the same as coming to grips with the world. It's reaching an equilibrium, again. It's getting things as clear, as rich, as thick as possible. And sometimes he says somewhere, I don't know where it is, having generally your expectations or your anticipations fulfilled as you go along. That's what you're trying to do. That's what it is to come to terms with the world. That's what you have. And that now that's all I want to say about that for a moment. And I want to say the opposite of this view is in 246. Okay, this is where I think I said already. Didn't I not Merleau Ponty starting in the middle of 246? Did I say that last time? Anybody remember? Well, I better say it now. Starting from the middle of 246 to the top of 248, we're not in Merleau Ponty. We're in Sartre. I told you the clue. You always know you're in Sartre as soon as you see in itself and for itself, which you see in italics at the top of 247. I swear this is where we were last time. Yes?
I'm curious why, about the maximum grip story and why you can't describe what's going on with the body. I'm kind of confused about that because it seems like you can be describing something and while
Well, I see your point.
Merleau-Ponty right now, and you can't use it in maximal grip on the
Okay. What I guess what I'm trying to say is, that's a perfectly sensible point. I mean, you can say you've got a readiness to see such and such, and then you get surprised or you don't get surprised. What is it that you can't describe? Well, suppose you just switched now. Maybe we're not disagreeing, and you just became detached. Then you wouldn't have any readiness anymore or any set. So maybe the thing to say is not that you can't describe the body. I think you're making a good point. What I mean to say is you can't describe the body except from an involved active point, because there isn't any readiness, set, feeling attention, lowering attention and all that, if you're just being an observer of yourself and the object. So it's not that there's not something to describe, but there's this special fact, and this is sort of the existential phenomenologist story, that it's a kind of phenomenology that you can only do from being involved. Of course, this leads you to a very peculiar thing, how to do phenomenology while being involved. He mentions it at the very end. He says we need a new radical kind of reflection, but he doesn't tell you how you're going to get it. At the very bottom of 280, you've just raised this point. As soon as you adopt a critical attitude and ask, what am I really seeing, you're missing a phenomenon. The task of a radical reflection, that's normal reflection. There he's thinking of Husserl and Sartre in this paragraph. This is sort of not him too. Well, it's sort of him and sort of not him, flipping back and forth. But at the bottom, he's saying where he stands. He says, the task of a radical reflection, the kind that aims at self-comprehension, consists paradoxically in recovering the unreflected experience of the world. And sometimes he calls that existence, because that always means being in the world, being involved, actually responding to the solicitations and tensions. So that's it. You're right. You caused me to refine it. There is plenty to describe. That's what our phenomenology is doing. But you can't describe it from where anybody else has tried to describe it. And I must say, I wouldn't, if you pressed me to say what in the world are this particular kind of, well, I will try to say it, but it's a challenge. I mean, how can you do this? How can you sit around and do phenomenology when and try to reflect on all this, but stay involved in it? That's a puzzle. I'll tell you what I think about it in a second. Yeah.
This point is very important, I think, because...
Can you hear him when he talks up here? Can you hear him? Talk louder.
This point is very important, I think, because maybe you think, and this is why you didn't like or didn't understand the way the speech chapter.
Yeah.
Because the fact of speech or of expression is precisely to express and not to judge in a detached way.
Okay. Don't bring up the speech chapter.
Merleau-Ponty has this quote on page 44 in the French, which is the phenomenon of true perception thus offers a significance inherent to the science, and that the judgment only optionally expresses.
Wait, are you in the speech chapter?
No, I mean the introduction.
Oh, the introduction. Oh, no, I don't want to talk about the introduction either. I'm sorry. You know, I don't like the introduction. I don't believe the introduction. We talked about this. I didn't assign the introduction. Wait, which introduction? Not the first introduction, just the plain introduction.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I'm just cancel what I just said. Strike it from the record. The introduction you mean to the sense experience chapter? What introduction?
It's in the chapter on attention and judgment.
The introduction to attention and judgment.
You told us not to read the preface.
Yeah, I told you not to read the preface. Right, introduction is good stuff. It's the preface. Don't read the preface. It will warp your mind. Okay, go ahead.
So, I mean, what you seem to think is that whenever you talk about description, you're judging or you're being detached. And Merleau-Ponty says that you have to conceive the judgment as a mere expression of a meaning that's constituted by your engagement and coping and blah, blah, blah.
Okay, but that doesn't solve my problem, which is what attitude are you in when you're getting yourself in, getting the data for this kind of judgment?
You're in an attitude that's in close comprehension, and that's in the foreword that you say people shouldn't read.
Well, it's probably not helpful then, but if you tell me where, I'll read it. But comprehension is different. Is that the same as radical reflection?
Yes.
It is.
Yes.
Does he think he's got it? Or Husserl's got it?
Well,
he thinks he's got it. Well, let's talk about it. If it turns out to be helpful, I'll assign it. Or we want to read the
Nothing
passage?
of intentionality, the comprehension, the phenomenological comprehension distinguishes itself from the classical intellection,
Okay.
which is limited
Yeah,
to
and what does it do?
the immutable natures, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, yeah.
So this is what
Okay.
I'm proposing.
Okay, well, I want to know sort of more, but all I want to say now is, and I don't have an answer to this, and if you tell me the pages of the introduction where he might be dealing with it, I'd love to see. What I think he really does isn't that at all. I just want to say, if you look at the book and say, well, how does he get us to see these things that he's talking about, which is always supposed to be how the world is when I'm involved, coping and not reflecting on it, he's either getting us to remember it, and that's dangerous because then there's reflection. And remember, reflection changes the phenomena. The famous example is Sartre's example, where he talks about, I'm involved in counting some cigarettes, and then I reflect on it, and I think I'm counting the cigarettes. But there was no I there counting the cigarettes while I was involved in doing it. That's just a very extremely clear, typical Sartre, so clear kind of example. So you can't trust anything that you find in your experience on reflection, and you certainly don't want to ever make the mistake of saying that it was there all along and you discovered it. You know, that we did that in the attention chapter.
But now Ponty doesn't have this point.
It doesn't have what?
He doesn't think that reflection is the same as Sartre does.
Well, no, he thinks it's radical reflection. Right. Well, first, normal reflection, certainly he's clear about that. I don't think we disagree about that. Changes the phenomena and you can't trust it. Let's just read that, so I'm not seem to be making it up. But I mean, this is obvious in a way. He sounds sort of Sartre like he's making the same point as Sartre, agreeing with Sartre, that the reflective life at the bottom of 254 differs from the unreflective in having been thematized, and what is given is not consciousness of pure being. Well, that's just a passing remark there. But anyway, take my word for it, and if you find anything that disagrees, I'd be surprised. Normal reflection changes the experience. I don't think we disagree about that, do we? That's why we need radical reflection, whatever that is.
But radical reflection doesn't mean that you disagree with the life of the consciousness.
Wow, that's surprising.
This is what Hubert says at the end of the introduction. So
Well,
he says that precisely real reflection.
Which introduction? The one I think is all right.
Yes.
Okay, let me look at it. Tell us where.
The chapter at the very end.
Okay, I'm at the end.
Reflection is really reflection only if it doesn't carry itself out of itself and knows itself as reflection on and unreflected, which means that you don't quit. You don't get out of this framework.
You don't get out. Okay, and that's what he thinks we're doing. I see where we are, by the way. 72. Let me just read it and think about it. Reflection is truly I don't know about that sentence. Boy, I'm not going to think about it now. I think he's denying this. True reflection knows that it's that itself as reflection on an unreflected experience, and consequently as a change in structure of our existence. So I don't know what's going on there. I mean, if you want to find out what the structure of our existence is, why would you want to change the structure of our existence? I mean, we want to know the structure of our existence when we are, as much as possible, I think, in flow, definitely, totally involved in coping.
Sometimes you think you're not coping all the time.
No, but then if you think, and you can then think about thinking, but the phenomenology of perception is mostly not about thinking. It's about coping.
Yes,
I
but
mean,
you have to be able to articulate it in the situations in which you think.
yes, but and when you think, oh boy, I'm not going to talk about this anymore. You see, because I see you're all phasing out. And you can think about it on your own. The question is, you want to talk about the way things are when you're not thinking about them and reflecting on them. How do you do it? And I think that's a problem. But I'm ready to think about it and come back and give you a report. Yeah.
just to show how how the whole reflection thing is relevant to the language chapter, I think the active...
Don't talk about the language chapter.
The active reflection in the use of language is what pulls us into thinking there are mental contents, but what we're overlooking is that language, he says language is uncommunicative of anything other than itself, and the word doesn't stand for any sort of meaning, the word is the meaning. So
you can say all that, but it just means it's just more words as far as I'm concerned. Wait, no, I mean, the problem remains. The problem remains, to what extent can you describe your absorbed coping experience when you're not reflecting and dealing with objects in the perceptual world, and not dealing with them as just objects you're standing back and looking at, but houses you're walking around and into. How do you know how that looks and feels? Well, you can do it.
So how can Merleau-Ponty write what you say?
Yeah, you can do it because he does it. Now, how he does it, I think, is reminding you of experiences you've had, like I did with the highlighting data of the milk and the wine. He does it by asking you to look at Merleau-Ponty. I still recommend. How many have looked at the Cézanne's Doubt, read Cézanne's Doubt? Well, there you see him at his best doing it, because he's saying, well, I really can't see this, but I can see that Cézanne sees what it's like to perceive an object, and I'll describe how he says it. He looks at all these brain-injured people and tries to see what it's like to lack a certain capacity, and thereby describe the capacity. He wouldn't need to go by way of Cézanne and Goldstein if he could just say, let's describe what it's like to have a lived body in grip with and transparently coping with the world. I think that's very hard to see, because immediately you're trapped into reflecting on it, and then the crypto mechanism says it was determined and it was there all along. This is hard. Anyway, I'm not going to go into it anymore. I don't know why I even brought it up, just because I wrote it down here. There's so many things I want to cover. Not that we can't come back to it. We will. He will. Any issue that comes up will come back. That's the story of this book. And again and again. Let's see. So we experience the normative pull of getting a grip. I just said that. Where am I? I was saying, what view is this opposed to? And that got us to, a certain kind of reflection, surely, is what it's opposed to. And where you stand back and take as an observer of yourself and your experience. And now in 248, where I want there. Well, that's what I talked about already. That's where we fell into the intentionality issue, and I'm not going to come back to it for a third time. So that's fine. Okay. Now we're to the point of the chapter on sense experience. Finally, what's going on here? Well, he's going to try to show the role of the body, even in our experience of color, where you think that you're just a sort of eyes looking at the colored thing. Even when we're not coping with things by walking around them, the body is still involved, and it's still part of a holistic system. And you've got to get in the right body stance to perceive colors, he says. This is just, he has to say this. I hope it's true. He's got a bunch of brain-injured people for whom it's true, and he tries to get you to see that it's normally true. Let me read it now and see where I am. No, I don't read that. So then he goes to these people on page 242 who have this diseases of the cerebellum and so forth. But what he's trying to show is what's interesting. Now back to 244. That colors, he says, vary the scope of my being in the world. That's about 15 lines down. That has to do with the fact, therefore, it would follow that since my body is my basic way of coping and being with the world, there ought to be a close correlation between what colors I see and how my body's stance or attitude is. And then he has these people who are sort of weird and who get into whole different positions in order to see red or green, but we're not like that. Then he gets to the artists, who's typical of him, which he likes, who are more sensitive to these color things than we are, and who say things that he thinks are so, like the middle of 244. Green is commonly regarded as a restful color. It encloses me within myself and brings a peaceful state, says one patient. But then we get an artist. It makes no demands on us and does not enjoin us to do anything, says Kandinsky, and so forth. I think he has got a case. Someone said it to me, and I thought it was a nice way to put it. It's not, you don't have to have problems with the cerebellum to realize that if you want to give a party, you want to have red and rosy light at the party, because people generally are in a more open frame of mind and they stand more openly and everybody just feels close to everybody. Well, you certainly don't want to do it with yellow light or green light as your party, unless you're a goth or something and want to create some very special mood. But even that makes the same point. I mean, if you want to create a special spooky mood, you can use spooky lights. And how do lights create these moods and get you to relate to other people and stand and so forth in some way? Well, it's because your body is tuned to the color. That's what he wants you to realize. And so he says it, and it seems right. So he has painters on his side. Now, 246 to 248 is not Merleau-Ponty. I don't know again whether I said that. Oh, I just said it a minute ago, didn't I? Okay, good. So now, okay, I'm catching up with where I am. Oh, here's a new one. We got to do this one. There is the important business, which is obvious, but we haven't said it, that it isn't I that does the perceiving, but that one perceives in me, as he puts it on 250. This is all part of a long discussion, which is about how we ever get so that we have in our body the correlate of how to get the right stance, so to speak, to see the color, and right movement of the hand to feel the surface of something. How do we do that? Well, we don't do it. It's something that's already done in us before we ever start. It really is. This is his strange way of talking about what's innate. He sometimes says that there's a perceptual tradition. There's somewhere he says that it's déjà monté, that it's already built in. Of course, he's got to have that view. The body has already understood the basic way that you should move to get in touch with colors, and the way you should move to feel objects, and how you should turn your head to hear better. You don't figure that out, and and therefore you have the sense that your body knows it already. He says it in many, many different ways. At the bottom of 249, for instance. Taken exactly as I see it in a moment of my individual history, and since sensation is a reconstruction, it presupposes in me sediments left behind by some previous constitution. That is, it's as if my learning about these basic ways to deal with objects and colors is something that I personally figured out. Now really, and he thinks it isn't. He either thinks it's already innate, which I think he thinks some of it is, or it was learned when I was a baby, before there was any me around, while I was just thrashing my arms and legs and finding out where my body was and how to use it, and finding out how to go. But there's lots innate. I just remember him just saying that I don't think he would mind if you put over a baby's head a kind of laser toy of the sort that they like to slap around when they're lying on their back, and the baby's hand goes right through it. The baby gets very upset, and that's because presumably it's got already innate wiring for that sort of thing. And I don't think Merleau-Ponty thinks that's wrong. I think he thinks that he says at the bottom of 249, I am a sentient subject, a repository stocked with natural powers, at which I am the first to be filled with wonder. Well, I think that's being stocked with natural powers is having a lot of innate things in your perceptual system, a lot of innate areas.
An innate complex, actually.
What?
In the first chapter of the first part, he talks about an
Innate complex, that's right. That's innate complex and already set up and so forth. There's nothing wrong with that, and that's important to him, and the body has that. And therefore, on 250 in the middle, so if I wanted to render precisely the perceptual experience, I ought to say that one perceives in me and not that I perceive. And then in the next page, in italics on 251, between my sensation and myself there stands always the fitness of some primal acquisition, that's another name for it, the innate, and which prevents my experience from being clear to itself. I experience the sensation as a modality of a general existence and one already destined for a physical world. Yeah, that's again, what's destined for a physical world is the fact that my innate way of coping with things fits the way it works, unlocks them. It runs through me without my being the cause of it. Do I have to say more about that? No. So, now we're going to go on to the next topic. And that's a big topic that goes on for a long time. The unity of the body, in this time, the intersensorial unity of the body. I mean, we had already the unity of the body in that I can do something with this arm or that arm, and have to stand up a certain way if I'm going to reach for something, and how all the parts of my moving body adapts to whatever I'm doing. But now we've got another unity story. There is the intersensorial body, and he's talking about that on 261. At the bottom. The senses are distinct from each other and distinct from intellection so far as each one of them brings with it a structure of being which can never be exactly transposed. Now, he has this funny dialectic which he doesn't explain very well. He says, I think, the way it goes is, that if you're an intellectualist, you think, well, there's no problem about how the senses get unified. There's a unified object there with a bunch of properties, and you don't have to do any unifying. When you've got an object, it's already unified its properties. And I don't know what that view is exactly. But then comes the view, well, but each sense modality is different after all. And then that long discussion of touch and sight, and how what blind people think sight is like isn't really what sight is like. And that seems to say, well, look, all the sense modalities are really radically different. It's not as if there's all sort of one way of sensing things and we use it to pick up the color and the shape and the sound and stuff of objects. Each way we have of picking up the sense qualities of objects is really different from each other one. And that gets him back to saying, oh yeah, but still there's only one unified body. They must all be interrelated. And then comes the synesthesia story and the mescaline story and how it turns out you could see sounds and hear colors and so forth. So he starts with what he says, I think, is an intellectualist sense that it's all unified already somehow. I'm not sure. Constituted. I don't know what it is. Then comes this other story about how they're all different. I think that's an empiricist story. And it's based on the préjugé du monde. Look, it must be this touching is totally different than seeing, which is totally different than hearing, because you've got a different organ for each. Then comes the surprising news, yeah, but you can hear colors and see, you can see sounds. How many have read The Sound and the Fury? I mean, that's the place to go. He doesn't know about Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury. That's what the first chapter of The Sound and the Fury, if you want to read it, is from the point of view of Benji, an idiot, who is very, very synesthetic and is smelling the sights and so forth. I don't know how Faulkner did it. Maybe Faulkner was a synesthete. I mean, nowadays, it's a whole thing in psychology. I've just been on a PhD thesis studying synesthesia. So you have to go out and find the subjects. Merleau Ponty talks about it as if, in a certain way, everybody has it. We'll look at that. We have a little bit of it anyway, where we can intersensorially sense things. Then if you have sort of brain problems, or if you take mescaline, he thinks you can really get synesthesia. But turns out there are lots of people who have it all the time, but they don't want to talk about it because they think they're weird. But if you go out and look for subjects, you can find people who hear sounds and who hear colors and see sounds all the time. And now people are studying them a lot to see what it shows about how the brain works. So, but anyway, that's the overall picture. So I'm jumping now to where we are. Let's see. So there is a unity of the senses, but then there is at the bottom of 261 a threat to the unity of the senses. Then comes a lot of talk about that. So there's that's the middle of 262 where he's saying that it doesn't seem to be holistic. Sensory experience is unstable and alien to natural perception, which we achieve with our whole body all at once, and which opens on interactive senses, like that insensible quality and so forth. And then he's trying to say, look, that's not how it is. As far as sensing is concerned, this is not a view he wants to defend, but he wants to explain. As far as sensing is concerned, people think that there are radically different experiences that go with each sense, and even with a particular sense like color. I want to mention this because I know it's too bad Alva isn't here, but he knows I disagree with him about this. And Sean Kelly's written a paper about this. The one that wants on what's it called? I can't remember. What? This I'm talking not about synesthesia now. It's the next issue is at the bottom of 262. I'll explain the issue first. When you look at this wall, it's better the one back there, and you see it as having one constant color, you also see it as the illumination is different. And on what we see when we do, I think is the name of it.
Not seeing things in Merleau-Ponty.
No, seeing things in Merleau-Ponty, exactly. The issue, and Merleau-Ponty is saying here, and Sean spells it out a lot. I'll see, is that the one? Yeah, okay. Sean spells it out a lot. Within color now, we're taking just one sense. Do you have sort of separate objective colors in your experience? Or is there something more fundamental, which is the interrelatedness of color experience, which isn't like having a lot of objective colors that you could distinguish with, so that wall matched some paint chip. That wall does match some paint chip, and you can match it up to it, and it's a certain off eggshell white, let's say. But Merleau-Ponty wants to say that the fact that it is that color of an eggshell white wall when the light isn't on it, that grayish color is no objective color. That grayish color is what you see when you see eggshell white in the shade. But what you see when you see that is not an objective color. The bottom of 262. I stress this because maybe we'll have to debate it with Alva sometime. Right now, in Alva's book, he has a chapter on, or a section on Sean Kelly, and he says that he just doesn't agree with Sean, that you couldn't find a color chip that matched the color of that wall in that shadow. And Merleau-Ponty is, one is the issue what Merleau-Ponty says. Merleau-Ponty says you can't, and it's very important that you can't, because what you see when you see color is, again, a holistic thing in which the whiteness of the wall, so that eggshell yellow of the wall is just that it implies that in the shadow it'll look like that, and in the brighter light it'll look like that, and in the middle light it'll look like that. There's one color, and it looks like the wall is that color. And then there's this interrelation of light and color, which is not another color, but is part of the way they interact. This is what he's saying at the bottom of 262. And it's, let me see where to start. Shall I say, about 15 lines, that all the sheets of paper look equally white? And then he says, well, no, some are in the shade. Then he skips down. If I assume the analytic attitude, then I can isolate just the ways that the color looks in the shade. And then I don't get a color chip color but I don't get eggshell white in a shadow either. I get what he says is a, what does he call it? A gray, steely blue substance, thick and not definitely localized. If I once more look at the general picture, that is the wall and the light or the papers on the desk, I notice the sheets over which a shadow is thrown were at no time identical with the sheets lying in the light, nor yet were they objectively different from them. The whiteness of the shaded paper does not lend itself to a precise classification within the black and white range. That means there's no chip, no color chip, or in this case, no gray chip that corresponds to them. It appears as no definite quality, and so forth. Then and only then have I found myself before it. But you can break down the field. I better read more. It appears no definite quality, and I have brought out the quality by fixing my eyes on a portion of the visual field. That is, if you reflect, or if you get rid of the context, then you can see this other something or other, which is a qualia, though I think he thinks even that is something weird that you can't find a chip. Then and then have I found myself before a certain qualia which absorbs my gaze. Now, what actually is fixing my gaze? Well, let me go on. I guess from the point of view of an object, it is separating the region under scrutiny from the rest of the field, the perceptual field. It is interrupting the total life of the spectacle, which is assigned to each visible surface a determinate coloration, taking the color into account. That's the holistic.
Taking the light.
Sorry, that's what I should say. Oh, good. Yeah, that's the holistic thing. And the idea that there is a sensible quality. That's really it. Now I said just as the various sense modalities aren't separate, but all interact in a holistic way. That's the synesthesia story. So within a particular sense modality, like perception, the particular colors are not separate, but interact in this way, that they all influence each other and the light and so forth. So at the middle of 263, the sensible quality, far from being coincident with perception, is the peculiar product of an attitude of curiosity or observation, which breaks down the holism. Then the bottom of the page, the quality of the separate sensory impact occurs when I break the total structurization of my vision. That is, I break up the gestalt, and then you get the elements. And the elements aren't anything that you ever really experience, because normally they all get the character they do, like that grayish, whitish, whatever, as being part of a whole bunch of colors in a field of light and so forth. Okay, now we've done that. Then he does the synesthesia. He says, look, all these colors are interrelated, and the synesthetes show them. I want to see how far I can get. I think I can finish. Let's see. There's all this about how these colors are all related in an object. We talked about that. That's got to do with the woolly redness of the carpet and the flexibility. That's when we're all like synesthetes. We can see woolly redness. We can see, we can hear the way glass sounds when it breaks, when we see how it shatters and so forth. He's got a whole big story about that. I'm not sure I'm convinced. It's the top of 267. That we can, the tinkling of the glass tells us about what it's made of, and gold looks the way like it's made of, and wood looks like what it's made of, and so forth. You have to check it with your own experience. It doesn't. I don't think it matters whether we really have that much of intersensorial experience or not, but we certainly must have some. Oh, I see there's one whole issue we haven't talked about. Okay, we'll start with it next time. Let me just tell you where it is, because it's so interesting what he does with it. And that is, he does a whole riff on binocular perception, starting at the bottom of 269. Maybe even starts earlier. Yeah, on 268. It's about how, with two eyes, I come to see one object with depth. And I tell you to look at it because it's all in terms of balance and synthesis and just the kind of thing we want to see. So next time I'm going to do the binocular vision part, and then we're going to go on to the space part.